Okay, Big Ten review and preview of this coming week. Have some interesting games coming up. Let's get through the past week. My Rutgers Scarlet Knights coming off a surprising beatdown by Wisconsin, even though they were a 2.5-point underdog, 42-7 at home in Piscataway. I'm still aggravated about it, but I won't rant any longer about that. It is what it is. But one game that was kind of surprising was Iowa-Washington. Now, Rutgers played Washington, and Will Rogers and the running back Coleman kind of piled up some yards. We kind of controlled the tone of the game. So when they lose to Iowa, 40-16, when Iowa puts up 40 points, it could take 3 games to hit 40 points. There's something amiss there. Washington's now 3-3. And, in typical Iowa fashion, they only passed for 108 yards. But also, in typical Iowa fashion, they ran for 220 yards, which is what they want to do. Play defense. Don't make mistakes. Make you play ugly with them. They're going to drag you down to their level. And they pull out a 24-point win against a Washington team that, they lost a lot of guys to the NFL, yada, 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 new coach. Still really talented team with very good recruiting classes. But Will Rogers threw the ball 50 times. When you have to throw the ball 50 times, whether it's Moss at USC, against Michigan, or Will Rogers having to throw 50 times, you're generally going to lose. And I've talked about this before, unless you're like a Big 12 team from the 90s into the early 2000s. So Iowa, good job of sticking to who you are as a team and playing the way you want to play and beating a pretty good team, despite them being 3-3, 40-16. This next game was kind of a surprise, and that's Illinois versus Purdue. Purdue, we all know, is struggling. And they are, at least record-wise, the worst team in the Big Ten. Kind of surprising because Brett Bielema wants to play defense in Illinois. This year they've been a little better on offense with Luke Altmaier at quarterback. So they've had better balance. They give up 49 points to Purdue. They beat them 50-49, and Purdue did the right thing and showed some balls and went for a 2-point conversion and missed. They lose 50-49 in overtime. Luke Altmaier, another big game. 379 yards, 3 touchdowns, 177 yards rushing. This is the surprising thing. Illinois has that really good balance between being able to throw the ball and rush the ball. Where was their defense? Their defense kind of disappeared. I think, if Purdue won this game, or, tied it up 51-51 and, sent it into further overtimes, maybe pull out a win, that could kind of change the season for them. Nonetheless, high-scoring game, and at some point, Purdue is going to have to turn their season around and get an unexpected win. It almost happened this past week, but I don't think it's going to happen next week. But nonetheless, next game, fun game to watch. Kind of a surprising game, not just in how it happened and the way it fleshed out, but how the game played out for the winners, and that's Penn State over USC in overtime, 33-30. I thought this was a fascinating match going into the game because it was going to represent Big Ten football versus Pac-12, Lincoln Riley, Big 12 kind of offense. They're going to have a team that wants to play defense, run the ball, be physical against the wide-open Pac-12/Big 12 kind of offense. And I have to say, USC surprised me. But that's not the only thing that surprised me. Alar was Penn State won the way that was outside their personality. LR was 30 of 43, 391 yards, 2 touchdowns. Did throw 3 interceptions, which helps explain how USC was able to keep pace and put 30 points on the board. Only 86 yards rushing by the running backs. That's not what Penn State wants to do. They'll take the win, obviously. Moss had talked about him the first few games when he's thrown the ball 54 times, 45 times. That's not a recipe for winning, especially in the Big Ten. 2 weeks in a row now, he's only had about 34 passing attempts. Still have not been able to pull out a win. They did, and that's a bigger surprise because they rushed the ball for 190 yards against a really good Penn State defense against the run. They averaged almost 8 yards a carry at 7.9. So, Moss 20 of 34, 220 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. A fun game to watch stylistically because it did come down to the wire and go into overtime. How was it going to flesh out? You thought USC may pull it out. Then you thought Penn State was going to pull it out. Goes into overtime. Penn State wins on a field goal. Interesting game there. Fun to watch. And when we talk about the ex-Pac-12 teams, how they match up against Big Ten teams, this next game was really surprising. And I thought, at least against the lower tier, mid-tier Big Ten teams, the Pac-12 teams wouldn't play with enough physicality to be able to hang in there all game. Except for Oregon. Oregon beats Ohio State 32-31. Can't get much closer than that. Oregon is that one Pac-12 team that has some physicality to them. Going into it, I just felt Ohio State was the much more balanced team, probably the best team in the country at balancing offense and defense. Number one defense in the country, number 3 offense going into this game. Will Howard was good. He was 28 of 35, 326 yards, 2 touchdowns. They had 141 yards rushing. Well, I have to get these ring lights that you plug into your PC are just really annoying. I have to find one that you can plug into a wall so you don't lose the lighting. Nonetheless, just felt Ohio State was the better team. Yeah, Oregon is a track team, playing against those Pac-12 teams. Didn't feel they had the physicality and defense to hang with Ohio State, although this year their defense has been very good. And at the top, I want to say top 15 to 20 defense. But they showed that they can hang with Ohio State. And boy, Ryan Day, he's getting ridiculed in some corners and in the digital world. Just can't seem to win the big one. I had some struggles with Michigan. 1-7 against top 5 teams. And from the $20 million roster, a lot of people are getting some joy, poking holes in the pomposity that is Ryan Day. Nonetheless, Oregon, Dylan Gabriel played over his head, I think. He's 23 at 34. 341 yards, 2 touchdowns. He's kind of erratic. He's up and down. You never know what you're going to get with him. This was one of those games where he was accurate, he was on point, moved the ball, and did very well. Next week, who knows what you get with him. But Oregon also rushed for 155 yards. So when you roll up 500 yards against Ohio State, that's a good day. And Ohio State almost had 500 yards themselves. But nonetheless, good win for Oregon. So now that kind of changes things. I wouldn't be surprised if we still saw Ohio State become a Big Ten champion. Make the college football playoffs. Nonetheless, kind of a surprise. I had Ohio State winning this game. Next one was a game that probably not a lot of people cared about. I expected it to be a boring game because it wasn't exactly going to be an offensive showcase. Minnesota beats UCLA 21-17, and UCLA is another team that's struggling. They're 1-5 on the season. Their offense, not good. But they were up late. But Minnesota did what they do. They pass the ball just enough, run the ball just enough. They pull out a victory against a UCLA team that really struggles on offense. And usually you don't see a team win when they don't rush the ball well, especially in the Big Ten. But Minnesota wins with 41 yards rushing. Brosnan was efficient, 26 of 37, 193 yards, 2 touchdowns. That was enough to get the job done. Garbers for UCLA, 3 interceptions. That's going to do it. And if you can't run the ball, that's a recipe for disaster in the Big Ten, and they only had 35 yards rushing. UCLA comes into Piscataway, New Jersey next week to face my Rutgers Scarlet Knights, and that was one of my keys to victory. To have success against UCLA, don't let them get well in the rushing game because they were rushing defense is pretty good. Rushing offense, not good. 119th, I think, in pass offense. So Minnesota 21, UCLA 17 in a game that probably didn't excite a lot of people. But the one that really surprised me was this next one. And that's Northwestern beating Maryland 37-10. Northwestern had some off-the-field issues the past couple years, make some coaching changes. They kind of want to run the ball, play defense. They're kind of like a poor man's Iowa. Again, another anomaly. They win despite only 80 yards rushing on 34 carries. We'll get to why in a second. Maryland no longer have Tagliavoa, but they're still a pretty good passing attack. They're a top 25 passing team. But they lose 37-10 mostly. I think they had either 3 or 4 turnovers. I think they had 4 turnovers. But the big thing was that they had 59 yards rushing on 33 attempts. That's not even 2 yards a carry. You're going to lose whether it's college football or in the NFL. You have those kind of rushing numbers. You're gonna always lose unless you can get 4 or 5 turnovers. And then, last but not least, my Rutgers Scarlet Knights, as 2.5-point favorites at home, have their doors blown off by Wisconsin, 42-7. Luke Fickell, Phil Longo. I'm sure they're ecstatic. They finally were able to see over the past couple of weeks that their offense comes alive. They had almost 600 yards against Purdue. I saw that as a bad omen for us because they finally were starting to get Wisconsin to get away from the downhill running, downfield passing team to a more modern style offense. Phil Longo, a New Jersey guy, bringing that high-powered offense from North Carolina with Drake May. Hasn't been working out. But it did the past couple of weeks with Braden Locke as the backup quarterback. They had 551 total yards, 310 yards rushing. That was a big surprise. They have a backup quarterback, number 1 running back out. The wide receiver room was dinged up. I think they were missing an offensive lineman, a tackle. We were missing some guys on Rutgers as well. Nonetheless, we get blown out at home, 42-7. We get UCLA coming this week at home, so we'll get to that game in the preview. So let's get to this coming week's preview. And you have some good games going on. And the first one, I think, has a little bit of attention, but this has a potential to be a really good game to watch to see how the differing styles match up, and if the two teams involved in this game going forward are the real deal or not. And that's Nebraska versus number 16, Indiana. Indiana is a 5-point favorite against Nebraska. And Indiana, they have that wide open kind of Pac-12, Big 12 kind of offense. They are the number 1 offense in the Big 10. They're number 3 nationally. They throw it for 321 yards a game. They rush it for 200 and a little over 200 yards. 47.5 points per game scoring makes them number 3 in FBS. A lot of people think it's smoke and mirrors. But, you know, I'll take a 6-0, 7-0 smoke and mirrors season any day. Indiana is kind of the real deal. But going forward now, starting with Nebraska, this is going to see how they match up with a more physical team. That is Nebraska. And I can tell you when Rutgers played Nebraska, it was a 14-7 Nebraska win. But it was a physical game where neither team was able to dominate. Dylan Raiola, big, physical, strong passer from the pocket. Reminds me of Dan Marino. Big wide receivers who are very good at high pointing the ball, but if you get to Raiola, and Rutgers did, we sacked him 4 times. I said if you can just rattle him, get in his face, he can miss high, he can miss wide. He's a terrific passer from the pocket, but he's not indestructible. You can get him to use his athleticism and his arm strength to overthrow, and it kind of worked for us. I think he was 13 for 26 or 14 for 28 against Rutgers, had like 150, 160 yards, interception. So how Nebraska's physicality matches up against Indiana's finesse is going to be an interesting matchup. I wouldn't be shocked if Nebraska won, but this might be one of those 35-30 kind of games. Nebraska's offense isn't necessarily high-powered, but I don't think Indiana's defense is all that daunting either. So I think Nebraska might be able to, with a dual running back system, be able to get enough yards on the ground, and Raiola can make enough pass plays to defeat Indiana, whose last win was against Northwestern. And I thought a 41-24 win over Northwestern. I thought, okay, Northwestern scored 24 points against the Indiana defense. It can't be that good because Northwestern is really bad on offense. And said that they wouldn't score 24 points the rest of the year. That is until the next week they scored 37 points against Maryland. Nonetheless, Nebraska versus Indiana. Indiana is a 5.5-point favorite. This next game, not much to say about it. 6-0 Oregon against 1-5 Purdue. We talked about Purdue's loss to Illinois, 50-49. This game, Friday night game, Oregon, not surprisingly, a 27.5-point favorite. Wouldn't be shocked if they covered. Purdue might be in it for a little bit. Seems like their offense is percolating a little, but Oregon most likely going to be 7-0 after Friday night. And next game, another kind of boring game that not a lot of people are going to be interested in, but I'm kind of going to be kind of fascinated about this game because it's Wisconsin versus Northwestern. Both teams historically kind of want to play physical, kind of want to run the ball, kind of want to play defense. Is Northwestern getting better? Starting to put some points on the board. They had a pretty good win against Maryland last week. Not the patsy any longer. How will Wisconsin, as a 7-point favorite, respond after a blowout win at Rutgers, 42-7, after they ran for 310 yards and racked up 551 total yards? Is this kind of a letdown game for them? I think this game has the potential to be close, at least at points throughout the game. We'll see how this one shakes out. Next one, 2 3-3 teams, and that's USC as a 9-point favorite over Maryland. Talked about Maryland, how they have a pretty good passing game. They don't run it very much. Past few years, they've had a pretty good defensive front, but they are 3-3, as is USC. Going into this season, I've said this before, I thought USC would be able to have their way against the lower tier to mid-tier Big Ten teams because of their explosiveness on offense. They seem to have pretty good balance between running and throwing. I wouldn't be shocked if they beat the 9-point spread and defeated Maryland by 10 points or more. Nonetheless, this could be a fun game to watch with two teams that like to pass the ball. Another game that has the potential to be kind of an ugly game to watch, and that's Iowa. 4-2 Iowa is 6.5-point favorites over 3-3 Michigan State. Michigan State's last game was a 31-10 to Oregon, loss to Oregon, which in retrospect isn't terrible. They were kind of close early, which Michigan State tends to do. This is going to be a tough game. You know, Aiden Childs has been struggling a little bit. You know, Jonathan Smith hasn't been able to get him going. You're going against an Iowa defense that's going to give you a hard time. Let's just say that. For Aiden Childs to get well against Iowa is going to be a tough task. Will Rogers, I don't want to say he had a bad game, but he didn't have a great game against Iowa, and I just feel he's a much better quarterback. But Iowa's 6.5-point favorite against Michigan State. This could be a good game as far as if both teams play ugly. Could be a close game in the end. We'll see about that. Another interesting game that probably is going to be pretty good, and that's number 23 Illinois versus number 24 Michigan. Michigan 4-2, surprisingly 3.5-point favorite over Illinois, who's 5-1. And we know what Michigan wants to do. They're not going to pass the ball a lot. They're going to want to run it. So for them to be successful, they're going to have to run the ball a lot. You're going to have to pass just enough to keep the Illinois defense honest. That gave up 49 points against Purdue, but I think Michigan is going to have some balance. You know, in their win against Purdue, they had 370. Illinois had 379 yards passing, 239 yards rushing. They can be problematic for Michigan if all they're trying to do is chew up clock, run the ball, and Illinois is making both plays in the running game, in the passing game. And if Luke Altmaier continues to have a hot hand and hits those slants and quick outs and screen passes underneath, it's going to be a tough game for Michigan. This should be a good game. 3.5-point dog. It'd be tempting to pick Illinois, but I wouldn't be surprised if either team won by 3 points. That'll be a good game, Michigan and Illinois. And finally, my 4-2 Rutgers Scarlet Knights, after a 42-7 loss at home, are 4.5-point favorites against UCLA. I think it opened up at 6.5 or 7. UCLA is 1-5. UCLA, one of the worst offenses in the country. They're generally 100 to 130th in all major offensive statistical categories. Their running game averages 59 yards per game. Their passing game is like 119th in the country. But their run defense, very good. One of the better teams against the run in the Big Ten and nationally. Rutgers, for the third week in a row, we're saying it. They're going to have to get Kyle Monangai and the running game going and have to get them going early. Sam Brown looks like he was dinged up last week. Not going to be available. You know, Greg Schiano is very Belichick-like when it comes out revealing who's injured and refers us to the availability report 2 hours before game time. So if Rutgers is going to be able to run the ball, they're going to have to get Kyle Monangai going. The running game has not been the same since left guard Brian Felter has gone down. Rutgers struggling a little bit. We're going to need to get quarterback Ethan Kaliakmanis. This is another key. over the past couple of weeks. Need to get him to have a bounce-back game where he does what he does well. He can't go 15 for 37 like he did against Nebraska. Can't go 12 for 32 like he did against Wisconsin. He has to be able to manage the game, make those short to medium range accurate passes. Has to be able to hit a couple deep shots, and that's going to depend on receivers being able to catch the ball. 6 drops last week. This is an ongoing problem. Rutgers wide receivers dropping balls in critical third down situations that change the momentum and the outcome of the game. So Rutgers at 4-2, 4.5 point favorite against 1-5 UCLA. This is another one of those games that a lot of people aren't going to care about. It's going to be fascinating to watch, though, because this is not a big game, big picture, but for Rutgers and Rutgers fans who thought we were going to be able to take the next step this year, getting to 5-2 will be critical against the UCLA team that struggles on offense. Everybody, there you have it. Big Ten review and preview. Enjoy your week.